All right. Well, again, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for this very important and timely discussion about teens, screens, and mental health. My name is Stephen Balcom. I'm the founder and CEO of the Family Online Safety Institute. FOSI is an international nonprofit organization that works to make the online world safer for kids and their families. We convene leaders in government, industry, and the nonprofit sectors to collaborate and innovate new solutions and policies in the field of online safety. So good mental health is vital to overall well-being for us and for our kids. During the pandemic, and indeed before then, there's been a deeply troubling rise of loneliness, anxiety, and depression among teens. Some studies have linked that rise to the increasing use of technology among young people. But at the same time, we know that creating online communities and connections can be beneficial to many teens. Lawmakers have acknowledged the importance of teens' mental health, and they have proposed bills like CAMERA to set up longitudinal studies into the physical and emotional effects of digital media on children and teens. And key committees have held multiple hearings on content moderation. At FOSI, we talk about creating a culture of responsibility, one in which we all have a role to play in creating a safer online experience. No entity can solve this alone. So we are thrilled to have a panel of experts here today to examine what the current research reveals, the opportunities for government and industry to collaborate, and we'll look at medical best practices and recommendations for parents to support a healthier dynamic between their kids and technology. Before we start, one quick note on logistics. Please feel free to submit questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will reserve time to respond. This webinar is also being recorded and will be available to view on our website, fosi.org, as well as on our YouTube channel. And with that, I'll hand it over to our wonderful moderator, Julie Jargon. Julie is the widely read and respected family and tech columnist for the Wall Street Journal. I have been honored and privileged to talk with Julie over the years for a number of her pieces, and we're very thrilled to have you here today. Thank you, Julie, and over to you.
Thank you, Stephen. Really appreciate you having me. Let's just get started talking about what the latest research says about the impact of technology on teens' mental health. Who would like to start summarizing kind of where we are with the research and what we know?
So I think I could probably take a stab at this first. So there is a number of research actually, like a lot of research data out looking at sort of mental health sort of globally and sort of tech use in teens. I think a lot of the focus in research has been looking at sort of the negative outcomes as opposed to potentially some of the beneficial outcomes. So there's been a number of studies looking at sort of depression and anxiety and aggression in relation to like social media use, for example, and then aggression and related to like violent video gaming or violent content on TV. All showing that like increased exposure to social media or to violent content results in sort of like negative mental health symptoms. But all of that has to be looked at through like a sort of a certain lens. A lot of that research that has been published has been sort of cross-sectional. So looking at it at one point in time, right? So looking at sort of depressive symptoms and like social media use, for example, at one point in time, as opposed to sort of looking at which one preceded the other. So it's really hard to sort of draw conclusions about which one came first, which caused the other, how one influences the other. One of the studies that I work on, which is the adolescent brain and cognitive development study, is starting to look at sort of technology use over time and how that influences sort of mental health symptoms over time, and vice versa. So we can start to actually understand the relationship between sort of tech use and mental health in adolescents, because there may actually be some beneficial effects, and that also that we shouldn't be looking at sort of tech use globally, right? Different types of devices, different types of content may have sort of different effects. So we're sort of in this sort of area where the data is sort of mixed, and it's hard to draw like hard and fast conclusions.
Would anyone else like to chime in with a little bit more on the research?
Yeah, if I could chime in there, just to add to Kara's caveats that she outlined, that a lot of the research is cross-sectional. I think we also need to understand this in a historical context. We are not the first generation to ask about a new technology and its effects on well-being. This goes back literally thousands of years, when in ancient Greece, people were talking about how writing stuff down instead of remembering is bad for you. In the 60s, there was a debate in America about how we were entertaining ourselves to death, amusing ourselves to death, because we wouldn't be able to follow town hall meetings of 6 to 7 hours. Instead, we'd be watching soap operas. The same debate came up in the 90s with video games that, by today's standards, have laughable graphics. I mean, if someone told you that Space Invaders or any of those games, like the original Doom in 1990, that's something that parents were really concerned about. And we look at this now and we find this amusing to a degree. So within that context, we also have to see that research really reacts to the public discourse in a way. Public discourse often is skeptical of new developments. And as a response, research then looks at the overall, at the broad measures of that new, let's call it technology or medium. The problem is that, for example, this concept of screen time is really imprecise. It's a bit like, it's subsuming, it's an umbrella term for all sorts of different media categories. And then we're not looking at context or content or the environment that media use happens within. So if you just look at the studies, the longitudinal studies that Kara talked about, we have to distinguish between comparing different people. So comparing someone to someone else, then we do see that those people with heavier screen use have slightly lower well-being compared to someone with lighter media use. But if we look at the same people over time and we look at changes within, if my media use is going above what I typically use, those effects are extremely close to zero and rather negligible. That doesn't mean that there are no effects. It's rather a reflection of that the research is in a really poor state, because we mostly ask people, hey, how much screen time do you have, which is a poor measure. And a lot of the research out there is of rather low quality. So yeah, to second what Kara said, we have a really mixed bag when it comes to the evidence.
Is there a rethinking, or should there be a rethinking of framing this as not so much about the amount of time people are spending, teens are spending on technology, but about the content? And also, are there specific areas of tech use that are considered to be more problematic than others?
So go ahead, Tracy. I spoke already, please.
I was just going to say, I'd love to jump in here, and I'm always thinking about these topics from an educator and then like a human development perspective. And there is a difference between active and passive media use. And we're seeing more and more research come out to explore the differences in those types of uses. And passive use is just what you would kind of imagine, but you're sitting there kind of just consuming media and not necessarily engaging actively. Whereas active use, you might be pressed to make some decisions or navigate the media in some way that you have a specific level of awareness. And we've seen all sorts of apps that do things like they teach coding, right? Teach computer programming, teach music skills, teach literacy, teach you how to be a miniature movie maker and create your own dance video. So there are different ways in which youth use media, and we want to be very mindful of what are those ways. And then again, I'd love to just echo my colleagues and say that no individual, I mean, all people are individuals, so there's no one size fits all. We really need to be thinking about how is my individual child engaging in the ways that they are, and what does that mean for them specifically?
I would also add just to that point, I think, so I work with young people directly. And I think one of the things too, when talking about the intersection and how different groups might have different experiences, I think in particular, LGBTQ+ youth find a lot more community, especially if they can't be out in their community, or even if their parents and families aren't supportive. So I think too, there's a lot of differences across groups of young people about, you know, the LGBTQ youth that I work with often say, I first explored my identity online. I didn't know anyone in my community who talked about this or felt like this, or I can't be out in my community and I can find a community online. So I think that too, there's some differences across groups and how they're able to, or restricted, or have different levels of freedom in person versus online.
And to follow up and sort of support Kelly, what the point on and having an online community. So I'm the Chief Program Officer at Crisis Text Line, and they're text-based mental health support and crisis intervention. And we see that about 65% of our texters share something for the first time that they've never shared with anybody else. So there are opportunities when it comes to supporting mental health and mental well-being of young people to have access to new technology, new media outlets to get support in that way.
What can parents do to help foster healthy tech use for their teens?
So I actually think it starts before your child becomes a teenager, right? So we're having these discussions about like adolescent behaviors, but you know, that's really built upon like what you're exposed to and sort of the values that you're exposed to during childhood. So I actually, I'm a child psychiatrist, and I work closely with pediatricians, and it's really the time to sort of build these like positive online behaviors when kids first get their smartphones, for example, when they first get video gaming systems. It's really beholden on the parents to start developing like good practices and behaviors then. And for like professionals, kids actually seen regularly, right? You go to a pediatrician quite regularly when you're young to sort of reinforce those behaviors. So it starts even before your kid becomes a teenager. When they first get access to these devices or platforms and things like that, to really instill good behaviors.
Are there any specific concrete steps parents should take to start these discussions? What should parents be talking about? What are the key areas that parents should be covering and discussing with their children?
One thing that I will say is that it is so important. Of course, we need to focus on the parents and the parents' relationship with their teens. To be most effective, we need to be listening to the teens as well, right? So when we look at research that explains the teen perspective, or we ask them this question, what they'll say is, trust me, show interest, have faith in me. They want parents to engage with them in ways that they can design guardrails and ways to engage with media that feel comfortable for the individual family. So I would definitely say you want to have open conversations and two things. First, don't just worry about like the scary stuff, right? Like parents are always like, put on your seatbelt, get your helmet on, like watch out for everything. But there's also all sorts of wonderful fun and creativity. And if parents will show an interest and engagement with that, they'll develop a baseline level of psychological trust with their children, so that if anything uncomfortable or confusing ever happens, there's a safe space to have a conversation about that. So I do also believe that We want to encourage families to lead with love, lead from a place of, I'm not gonna judge or be angry. I'm just so curious and want to support you. And I think with that attitude, you're much more likely to have your child be willing to engage with you with the learning experience as you, as a family, go on this digital journey together as we learn this new digital landscape.
Sorry to butt in. Julie, we've had a request that everyone introduce themselves because it would be really good to know who people are and where they're from. So I'll duck out again, but I'll hand it back to you on that.
Absolutely. Kelly, why don't we start with you?
Did you say me? Sorry.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly Davis. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Associate Vice President of Peer and Youth Advocacy at Mental Health America. So in my work, I work on the expansion of peer support and also youth and young adult leadership that fills gaps in traditional mental health services. Thank you. Nicholas.
Yeah, hi there. I'm Niklas Johannes. I am a behavioral scientist at the Oxford Internet Institute here at the University of Oxford. And in my research, I look at the effects of digital technology on adolescent, on and adult well-being and performance, with a recent focus on the effects of video games.
Cara.
Oh, hi, everyone. My name is Cara Baggett. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I'm at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York City. I also primarily do research. My research is focused on looking at sort of quote unquote the addictive aspects of technology use and how it affects brain development in children and adolescents.
Becca.
Thank you. Yeah, we were so excited to get the discussion started. We just jumped right in. The important topic. I'm Becca Ross. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and have focused much of my career on suicide prevention and trauma-informed care, specifically with adolescents. Currently, I'm with Crisis Text Line, the Chief Program Officer. And at Crisis Text Line, we offer free 24/7, high-quality text-based mental health and crisis intervention support for anybody in their moment of need.
And Tracy.
Hi, I'm Tracy, first name Tracy, last name Elizabeth. I'm the global policy lead for minor safety at TikTok. I started my career as an elementary school teacher and then went to the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where I got a master's in prevention science. So looking at risk outcomes in youth, how can we design policies and processes to prevent those risk outcomes? Then returned to Harvard, where I got my doctorate in adolescent development with a focus on teenagers and media. So I have dedicated my career to designing entertainment media that promotes social and academic wellness in teens.
Well, thank you all. I'd like to talk a little bit about the role of government when it comes to regulating tech companies and getting involved in tech use. So who would like to start talking about that? I'll have to call on someone if no one raises the hand.
I can go ahead, at least for my specific niche here. I think one point, so something that I touched upon earlier, which is that screen time is very poorly measured. That can be remedied with better measurements, and that measurement often doesn't come from scientists, but from companies. It's really hard for us at a university to get accurate measures or to get the actual behavioral data that we're interested in to see the effects of tech use on well-being. And that is something that companies understandably, I guess, keep very close to their chest. And there hasn't been a lot of collaboration with independent scientists to provide those data, to engage in research projects, to answer those questions. So I would say that government could focus on maybe leveraging, getting those data or getting those collaborations going.
Anyone else want to chime in on the role of government? Let's talk about the role of the tech companies then. And Tracy, you might want to say something about this. I know a lot of parents feel like they this is all on them to kind of monitor and control what their kids are able to access online. But what role do tech companies have to play in ensuring the mental health safety of the young users that are using these platforms?
I love this question, and I could spend 45 minutes talking to you about this, or days and days. Okay, so first of all, the phrase, like, it takes a village. It really takes a village. So industries must unite and collaborate. I'll start with that. And if you take anything from what I say, please, that's it. I think tech companies can lean into investing in experts, so in-house experts and external experts. I think it's very important that companies hire people who authentically understand the psychology and developmental trajectory of teens, because there are differences as one transforms essentially from a child to an adult, and we need to be very, very cognizant of that as we design our policies and product features to protect youth. So in-house, I think it is so important that the organizations are just staffed with folks who know how to identify high quality research, as opposed to research that might not be as high quality. And then just to follow up with that, partner with experts, like external experts. We've partnered with, like, Boston Children's Hospital's Digital Wellness Lab. They're staffed with world-class pediatricians, psychiatrists, psychologists, etc. They do great research. We partner with other researchers who know the best and most recent methodologies for not just collecting data, but analyzing those data. So strong partnerships with scholars, but then also partnering with our child advocacy partners. So FOSI, we partner with Thorn, right? The National PTA. There's all sorts of organizations who want to do good, and we need to learn together, and as a united front, develop best practices and lean into those best practices and strategies for designing for teens.
Does anyone else have thoughts?
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, go.
I would just add, so I think there's a lot of important stuff on the health promotion and wellness side, but I think on the kind of crisis and distress side, it also speaks to the intersection of tech and community mental health and racism and policing, because there's a lot of kind of more surveillance for youth who are indicating suicidality. And I think it also needs to be part of this conversation that we're having now around crisis response, is what do we do and where do we send young people when we do identify them when they're in mental health crisis? They may be a danger to themselves and others. So I think too, it's not just this is outside of the realm of tech, and tech is, not this separate thing, but is intertwined in all of our daily lives and everything that we do, especially for young people. So I think to not get the sense that online stuff is only online, but it's really intertwined to broader conversations we're having as well.
Cara, did you have?
Yeah, and so I had another point, but I'm going to piggyback onto Kelly's point too. As clinicians, I think there's a lot of fear around, like, engaging with youth around, like, social media and other sort of tech use, because of sort of what Kelly brought up, is that there are no clear guidelines about how to sort of address, like, suicidality that's expressed through, like, social media platforms, for example, and things like that. So it makes it very difficult actually on the clinical side when there's no engagement with, like, the tech companies. Clinicians are sort of at a loss for what to do. So there are crisis lines, for example, like Becca and things like that. But in terms of, like, engaging with your own clinician around sort of behaviors that are going on online and sort of what that may stir up or bring up around suicidality or other mental health issues, clinicians are sort of at a loss right now, because there's no, like, good education around technology use and how to engage with their patients around technology. So that was just my comment in response to Kelly, which I think is an amazing point. And then I think on the research side, it's really, and Nicholas brought this up, it's really, really difficult to do good research because technology companies in general have not been really, like, open to partnering with researchers around like how people in general, adults or youth, are engaging with their platforms and sort of the outcomes of that engagement. Through ABCD, so the Adolescent Brain and Cognitive Development Study, which is this large national, like longitudinal study. They've made efforts to outreach to some tech companies to be able to incorporate, to be able to do a better job of looking at tech use in youth in a more nuanced way. And no one has been open to it. And, NIH is spending billions of dollars on this longitudinal study. And we're not able to sort of look at outcomes in a really nuanced, fine-grained way that we would if we were able to sort of partner with larger tech companies. So it's actually impacting like sort of research and our ability to answer some of these questions that you're asking us today.
Well, I think one of the main questions that I think a lot of parents have is, how do I, as a parent or an educator or counselor, recognize signs of negative impacts of technology use in teens? What are some signs that you might see that could indicate that there could be a problem? Anyone want to jump in?
I can jump in, but I don't want to do all the talking. So if anyone else has anything to say. I think that it's the same with any sort of problem behavior. So I do a lot of research in substance use disorders as well in teens. So if you see any changes, concerning changes in your child's behavior, right? Whether that's they seem more depressed, they seem more anxious, or they're engaging in sort of more risk-taking behaviors, things like that, anything that seems off. And at the same time, you're noticing more video game use, for example, or more engagement in social media, things like that. I think it's really just being tuned in as a parent to who your teen is and if there are any changes over time. And it speaks to Tracy, what Tracy said earlier about really being engaged with your teen around their digital media use. So if you know what's going on and you know that they're engaging more, and then at the same time they're having changes in their behaviors or mental health, then that's a good way to sort of keep tabs on it.
Thank you. Anyone? Yeah, Becca.
Thanks. I think that's a perfect explanation, and would just encourage parents, teachers, anybody to really, if you're noticing those signs, to engage in a conversation. Probably one of the bravest things that anybody could do is ask if somebody's okay and show up with empathy. And so similar to how we've been talking about partnering and really collaborating with young people and being involved and invested. And so if you are seeing changes in behavior, to ask, to really to show up with empathy. You don't have to be a clinician to do that. We all have empathy, and so being able to say, okay, I noticed this. Are you okay? I'm here to listen. You're not alone.
And then, if you do notice some red flags that are concerning as a parent, what can you do about it? I think a lot of times the knee-jerk reaction of parents is just to take the tech away. We're having a problem, take the device away, stop the video game use, whatever the concerning behavior might be. What are some thoughtful and maybe better ways to help your child if you're noticing some negative effects with their tech use?
I think what Kara and Becca said was spot on, meaning that the change in behavior and an increase in tech use, for example, is often just a symptom. So it's an easy target to then go, okay, I'm going to take your PC away, rather than doing what Becca suggested and talk to your kid about what's really going on. A lot of if you have excessive use of technology, it's often a symptom of something other that's going on, depressive issues, other disorders. And I'm not a clinician, so I can't speak to what you should do, but I can say what you shouldn't do, which is to just say, okay, it has to be your PlayStation, and make it easy for yourself and to say okay, I'm going to remove that from your environment. My job as a parent is done.
So in other words, that you're taking away something when there's an underlying issue that you might not be addressing just by simply taking the technology away.
I have a couple of points. So I think one of the most irritating things you can hear as a young person is get off your phone, especially when your phone is your means of connection to other people. If you're isolated, if that's the way that you talk to your friends. I think too, a lot of times adults, because it's been a while since you've been a teenager, dismiss the emotional complexity of being a teenager. And I think one of the things too, yes, technology plays a role, but the New York Times just had an article about this. In our research, the biggest thing that young people say is distressing them is the anxiety around the pressure to perform highly in school. So there's a lot of other things that are happening for young people that is not just get off your phone. And that I think if that's the perspective, to Tracy's point, that's a great way to immediately shut down the conversation. I would also say, I'm going to put in the chat, so Mental Health America, as a kind of national nonprofit, we do a lot of public education. One of our campaigns is a back to school campaign where we provide resources for, some of them are for youth, but often a lot of times they're for teachers and for parents. And there's a lot of guides about how to start a conversation about mental health with your child. So I'll drop that in the chat as well for folks who are interested in checking that out.
Thank you. Now, I know that oftentimes teens will use technology for good purposes, like seeking out mental health support and for supporting one another. Can one of you address how teens are actually taking the initiative to seek out mental health support for themselves and others? Becca or Kelly, is that something you want to?
Sorry, I lost my mute button. It took me a second to get that back up. Yes, absolutely. So at Crisis Text Line, 73% of our users are 24 and younger. And so our users are definitely skew younger. And also we see in this age group, in the under 24 age group, we see people reaching out to us in overnight hours and on the weekends when other supports and resources might not be available. And so having access to quality mental health support in that way is really important. And then understanding, like Mental Health America and other reliable sources of support for young people, being able to refer and have connections to the right place. But even with COVID, a lot of the mental health supports have gone virtual. And so access to mental health is increasing, and the support of that is done through technology and online. So there's definitely opportunity for us to continue to support and improve mental health in this way.
One of MHA's largest programs is our online mental health screening program. So we have 10 mental health screens for depression, anxiety, PTSD. They're all clinically validated tools, so they would be what your clinician would ask you. And we've had over 6 million people take our mental health screens. 2/3 of them are under 24, so similar to Becca, lots of young people. Of those young people who screen moderate to severe, 2/3 of them have had no formal contact with mental health services. And most of them say they don't want to. They're really just in the beginning kind of exploring, I'm noticing something different about me. I've heard the word depression. I've heard the phrase bipolar disorder. And I'm kind of just looking to explore my mental health and well-being. So I think that young people are seeking information about health online. And there's a lot of really great resources that can help them explore, like Becca said, Mental Health America, National Alliance on Mental Illness. I would also say in my work with young people, although I primarily work with folks 18 to 24, there's a lot of youth who are starting their own mental health initiatives, and part of those are naturally online. So for example, one of the young people who I've worked with, her name is Ari. She created an app. Basically, she noticed when she was in high school, she was doing a lot of coding, and she noticed that the LGBTQ+ youth in her school were experiencing severe distress. So she created an app that can be used anonymously, where young people can support one another. And now, was featured on the what is it called now, on the Apple, main page on the App Store. So I think that there's a lot of young people who are really, really interested in stepping up, whether that's doing formal training and peer support, creating mental health clubs in their schools, and those kinds of things. So I think this, taking an empowerment approach as well, and saying young people have an important voice and are an important resource because they trust their friends and they trust their peers in being part of teams and part of this increasing mental health and well-being literacy.
Great. I just want to remind our viewers that they can submit questions in the Q&A, which we will get to shortly. But we're talking about teens here. It's a pretty broad spectrum of between 13 and 19. There's a lot of developmental changes that happen during the span of the teenage years. How would you describe how the approaches that teens that we should take with our teens, technology use evolves over time? Should our approaches as parents and educators and counselors change with it? A 13-year-old who's maybe joining social media for the first time might have a very different worldview and experience than someone who's 18 or 19 and has been on social media for a very long time. Does anyone want to kind of talk about the spectrum and how we have to evolve and change as our teens grow and change?
I'd love to jump in here. When you look across the body of research in child psychology, scholars tend to agree that there is this concept of early adolescence, mid-adolescence, late adolescence. They tend to categorize adolescence into different segments, but what we do know is that as an adolescent moves from the childhood phase into the adult phase, that they do start to exercise and grow their muscles for things like judgment, right? Good judgment, decision-making, self-regulation. So, and again, I'm speaking also from the tech industry. What I think that families can do is they really do, we'll say this over and over, but they need to sit down with their teens and have conversations and also get to know what types of media are available. And within those media, what guardrails are put in place to protect teens. So there is a responsibility for the tech industry to be designing product features that honor the developmental phases of youth. So I recommend that parents sit down and think about with their teen, talk together and say, okay, so what app are you on here? What app are you on here? Let's dig into the resources, the privacy settings, the tools, and figure out how we can best cater this experience for you and then you, right? And I think that the earlier teens need more guardrails. They really do need to have less access to some features that are more comfortable for adult users to have. But then as you age up, you exercise your decision-making and your judgment. You should then be empowered as a teen to start to take control of your own digital experience. And these are the types of strategies that just organically prepare the youth for being an adult, which is the phase after that.
So I'll jump in on the research side, and it actually just sort of blends in nicely to what Tracy was talking about. Is from the sort of brain development side of things. We know that brain development really accelerates during adolescence. It starts speeding up, but the brain is not really fully developed until you're in your early 20s. So let's say 22, 23, 24. Right. And so the decision making, the judgment, sort of the executive functioning that Tracy was talking about is actually not fully developed until you're in your early 20s. So adolescents are sort of more wired to make bad decisions just because that part of the brain isn't developed until you're in your early 20s. So I think having parents know that and being able to support their kids around making good decisions, like Tracy was saying, is really important, because sort of the reward part of the brain, the part of the brain that makes us do things because it makes us feel good, the part of the brain that's hooked into how we feel emotionally when we do things, that's developed by the time you're 15, right? So kids are going to do things that automatically make them feel good earlier on, as opposed to kids that are in later adolescence, early adulthood will sort of stop and think about their decisions and make decisions based on really thoughtful planning. So as a parent, it's sort of helpful to know that as you're working with your teen around these issues.
Right. We've got some good questions that have come in, so I'm going to switch over to those. First question is, are digital contracts okay to do with children still? And when doing this, do parents need to follow also? What research is there for parents increasing social media use and then not following the rules applied to children? Who would like to take that question about entering into a social media contract with your children and whether that's still a good idea to do? Nicholas, I'm going to pick on you.
Sure. I mean, not my area of expertise, so I'm just going to talk in common sense here, but I would assume, not having kids, if I had a child who hopefully sees me as a role model and I tell them, do this, and I don't do it myself, that this is not particularly good. Sorry, maybe that's a bit too trivial an answer, but maybe someone else can chime in here.
Well, what about the notion of entering into a contract? I think this is something that's become sort of popular advice, that once your child has a phone and starts on social media, you establish some ground rules and you develop a contract, a sort of agreement where your child knows the consequences if they violate any particular rules that you've established. Is that a good idea, Cara?
Sure. So I actually think it is. And people may have different opinions. So I just want to say, like, modeling, I think, is the best contract, right? So whatever you're doing, like Nicholas said, even though he's not a parent or a clinician, he hit it right on the nail on the head. This is what I advise parents, is that kids see what you're doing and they're going to do the same, right? So modeling good, responsible behaviors is always a good practice, whether it comes to technology and digital media use or substance use or any of that. That is always a good thing to keep in mind as a parent. The kid sees what you're doing, they're going to follow along. So do things that are good, that you want your kids to, behaviors that you want your kids to engage in. And in terms of the social media contract, I do think, again, I said this earlier, that these conversations start as soon as kids start engaging with technology, digital media, whatnot, right? You sort of lay the ground rules and the boundaries around it. And of course, it's going to evolve as kids age, right? So my oldest is 7, right? I don't expect my 7-year-old to have the same behaviors as he will when he's 16, right? So the conversation will evolve as he ages. But I do think you have to lay the ground rules at every single sort of developmental stage, what's appropriate in the stage, what do I expect from you? And again, it's a conversation, what are other kids your age doing? What are your friends doing? And let's see if we can come to some sort of agreement around what's appropriate for your use at this time.
Great.
And I would just add on to that, the contract is only as good as the relationship that it's built on. So having that trusting, engaged relationship with the young person is crucial in sort of that piece of carrying out a contract and shared understanding of expectations.
Thank you. Our next audience question is, how important is it for parents to uplift their technical knowledge of their digital home? And how important is it to implement parental controls at home, whether it's hardware or software related parental controls? Tracy, I'll call on you for this.
Okay. Yeah, I can't really speak to the home software, but I will say in general that it is important to, it is so important for parents to familiarize themselves with the types of media that their youth are using. Absolutely. So there's on TikTok, we have the Guardian's Guide. It's a portal where guardians can go and they can jump in and read about all of the different features that TikTok offers, right? To implement safety settings, how can you monitor or put caps on screen time, et cetera, et cetera. So all sorts of media companies will have and should have some sort of parameters and information for families, and not just about the specific app use, but also hopefully information, for example, about bullying. How do you know when you see bullying? How do you respond to that? So So I do think that there, it comes back to this, it takes a village, that it helps quite a bit for parents to become informed about the different types of media and safety tools that these media offer, but then really to talk to the kids, like you need to talk to your teens together about those forms of media, which kind of ekes right back into this conversation we had a moment ago about the digital contract. The most effective way, like we've seen from prevention science, you never want to take an abstinence approach, right? You want to take an informed, collaborative, okay, I understand that you're going to be on these apps or using this technology. Given that that is a fact, what are we going to do to educate ourselves together and make sure that it's a place where you can just have a lot of fun, develop your identity, express your creativity, and engage with a community that makes you feel really excited and interested about different topics?
Thank you. Next question comes from someone who says, I would be curious if any of you have thoughts on Instagram for kids and what that might mean for tween mental health. Anyone want to tackle that one? Just a little bit of context. Several state attorneys general recently sent a letter encouraging Facebook not to provide Instagram for children younger than 13. So any thoughts on that and how that could impact kids' mental health if they're starting to get on that platform at a younger age?
So I'll start out. So one thing, so I just want to say, first of all, kids are on social media younger than 13. So just putting a label on it does not mean that now like there's going to be a flood of under 13-year-olds joining social media, right? There are kids that are under 13. A large proportion of kids that are under 13 are actually on social media, especially if they already have their own smartphones. So I think that worry should sort of be just like, we should just put that out there at the outset. Second of all, I think it comes back to what we were talking about way at the beginning of this conversation. I think Kelly brought up like the nuances between different types of kids, right? For some kids, I actually think like social media, multiplayer video gaming actually helps their mental health. It helps them socially and in terms of their social functioning. So just as an example, we know that kids with autism spectrum disorder have really like restricted interest. They have a really hard time connecting to people in person socially. And so things like multiplayer video gaming, social media can actually be really beneficial for those types of kids because they can sort of engage with others around their very restricted interest and not be thought of as strange or weird. They find really like a group of people to connect with and engage with in a social way that sort of reinforces their own interests. And so it can actually be good for kids. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad for everyone thing. And I also think that kids are already on social media before the age of 13.
Okay. Next question. I think it says, should I be more scared of my kids being on TV or on the internet?
Can I just say, like, don't be scared, be informed and excited. You know, there's all sorts of wonderful benefits to these media. And it's just a matter of how the individual is engaging with the media and what types of media it is. So be informed, talk about it together, watch together if it's TV, be curious about your teens, what they post or who they're engaging with on other social media apps, and be excited about it. There's tons of opportunity for creativity and education.
Yeah, if I can just tag on to that, I think that's spot on. We as a society, we have this weird thing that we think that reading is good for us, but video games are bad for whatever reason. Like this elitist view that some sorts of media are better than others, but that's not really the case. As Tracy said, it depends on the content that you consume. Depends on the context and with whom you're consuming stuff. Plus, at this point, TV and internet are, I'm not even sure they're distinct categories anymore. I mean, at least my TV has a Netflix functionality and other streaming capacities. So just to say, also the internet as an entity is just so fuzzy a concept that I think it's more about the content and the categories you engage with rather than the device.
Okay. Another question is, how do you help a teen who gets very aggressive to the point that they get physical when you try to establish boundaries or limit screen time and they're staying up all night on their phone? Anyone want to talk about aggression and what to do about that? Cara, I'm going to choose you again.
Yeah, so I can talk about it as long as no one else. So, you know, so I think if your child is having actual like demonstrable mental health symptoms or psychiatric symptoms that you can put your finger on, right? I think it's important to engage with like a therapist, a psychiatrist, someone like some mental health professional. So I want to say that first. I think that is probably like the most important step because there's likely something else going on. You know, and as a parent, you want to sort of understand what's leading to these behaviors. So if your teen will allow you to have a conversation around what it is that's causing them to become so upset around like removing the device or whatnot, then that's a conversation that should be had. But I do think that it sounds like in this case, linking to like a mental health professional would probably be advisable.
I'll just add that, and I can put another link to MHA's resources in the chat, but I think too, just as a side note, I'm not a clinician, I don't work with parents, but I know from being in the mental health world and working with a lot of young people that there's also some gendered components, just, you know, for more nuance around what depression looks like and typically in boys versus girls. So I think a lot of times what looks like or what shows up as aggression in boys is often signs of depression. So I think too, just getting educated more about some of the gender differences in how mental health conditions can show up. And I can put links to our resources in the chat again as well.
Okay. Another question that's come in is from someone who says that their schools have done surveys of high school students and found that there is a significant impact of negative social media comparisons on levels of anxiety and depression in teens. What suggestions do you have for schools or parents to mitigate this impact?
I can chime in here. There's quite a literature on social comparison on social media. But again, it's quite nuanced. So it is not the case that everyone compares themselves to an influencer or to someone very popular in your class, and as a consequence feels bad about themselves. It really depends on the type of comparison. Is it upward or downward? Some people look down on others, think like, well, my life's going pretty good, and that makes them feel good. Others have what's called benign or take motivation out of social comparison. If you see someone who has achieved something that you want to achieve, and then finding similarities between you and that person can also lead you to be more motivated to achieve that goal. That is not to say that social comparison is always good, but it's certainly not always bad. As for what to do about it, I mean, that's tricky because obviously you don't want to interfere with, or at least when kids aren't at a certain age, you don't want to interfere with the content and their communication because that can feel like an invasion of privacy.
Okay, we have about time for one more question. And so I'm going to ask this one, which is, can you address the issue of cyberbullying and how that impacts the mental health of young people? Tracy?
I'll speak to this a little bit, sure, but I do want to, I would love to leave time for the mental health experts to jump in. But, you know, two things. First of all, we definitely need to make sure that all youth have a trusted adult. If it's not a parent, is it someone else who they can go to and let them know if there's something going on that's making them uncomfortable. Also, there's reporting features with that oftentimes apps will offer to say, like, this is making me uncomfortable. Can I just report this here? Differently, I think it is so important that we also remind we're very protective of our teens, which we need to be, but we assume that they're the victim. Parents also need to be aware that sometimes your teen might be the one who's engaging behaviors that are making others uncomfortable. And so it is so important to also have honest conversations about how, when we engage in digital spaces, we have this extra like cloak of bravado, right? It doesn't feel the same as saying something in person, like straight to someone's face. So have conversations with your teens about, just like you would engage with a friend in person or a peer group in person, you've got the same responsibilities when you're in digital spaces.
Does anyone else want to chime in on the topic of bullying and the impact that might have on teens' mental health before we end the discussion?
I'll just say quickly that cyberbullying is like no different than being bullied in person. It feels bad. It can make people depressed. It can make them anxious. It can have the same sort of mental health effects. But I agree with Tracy. There can be a fine line between being bullied and being the one that's bullying others.
Okay, thank you. Well, since we just have a couple of minutes left, I'll turn this over to Stephen in case he has some closing remarks. Thank you all.
Well, thank you, Julie, and thank you. What an outstanding panel. I hate to even come in and stop this, but lots of food for thought. Lots of great resources were shared. Also, great questions coming in from our participants. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to them all. A couple of highlights for me. Kelly, your point about us adults often forget what it's like to be a teenager. That really struck me. And it's really important to ask your teen if they're okay and use empathy. So appreciated that. Tracy, don't be scared, be informed and engaged. We have a rule at FOSI never to use fear-based messaging. As a psychologist myself, I know that fear switches off the frontal cortex, which is where reasoning and judgment and analysis resides. And we end up working from our primitive brain, which is not always so great in these complicated situations. And also, Tracy, have honest conversations with your teens. So important. Really appreciate it. Cara, we lent heavily on you for your expertise and really appreciate it. Nicholas, great insights from the research, and you guys are doing such amazing work at OII. And Becca, really appreciate all of the work that your text line provides for teens in need. It's a remarkable service. So, and Julie, thank you for steering us through this. So much more for us to discuss. I do want to point out that, again, we've recorded this. It will go up on our website at fosi.org, as well as our YouTube channel, so you can revisit this. We'll be sending out an email tomorrow with a little summary of all of this. Also a link to the FOSI brief that was mentioned, linked to earlier. Also a big plug for our European Forum on Wednesday, the 26th of May. And it is called Children at Play, Developing Skills, Community, and Connection Online. And this is looking at preteens and their use of play online and some of the positive things that were referred to and Kelly, you particularly made that point earlier. So with that, just want to once again thank you all. No doubt we will continue to have this discussion throughout the year. And I have no doubt that this will be a theme that we will return to at our annual conference in November, which, fingers crossed, will be a physical event with an online presence November 15th here in Washington. So with that, thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll be seeing you on and offline. Take care.